When I first arrived in Juniper Heights, the tree-lined streets drew me in instantly. Towering pines, majestic oaks, and ornamental maples framed each sidewalk, their canopies dancing with the mild breeze. Having spent much of my adult life traveling for the National Forestry Service, I'd come to cherish the symbiotic relationship between people and trees, how they cooled our neighborhoods, filtered our air, and provided crucial habitats. So, when I inherited a quaint, craftsman-style home in Juniper Heights from a distant relative, it felt like destiny. Finally, I'd have a place where I could live quietly while also doing my part to preserve the natural beauty around us. On move-in day, I parked my government-issued SUV near the front yard. A tall southern magnolia brushed against the house's eaves, dropping glossy leaves onto the porch. The property included a sprawling backyard, where a row of mature cedars offered privacy and shade. After years of overseeing large-scale conservation projects, it was a joy to think about nurturing just a few trees in my own backyard. No sooner had I unloaded the first box than I heard a sharp rap on the door. Opening it, I encountered a middle-aged woman with a pinched expression and meticulously coiffed hair. She wore pressed slacks, a pale pink blouse, and carried a binder labeled Juniper Heights HOA Regulations. Her pinched smile never reached her eyes. "Good afternoon," she said curtly, scanning my nearly empty living room. "I'm Miranda Woodson. Some neighbors call me Karen, a nickname they find amusing, I suppose. I'm the vice president of our homeowners association." Her gaze slid past me to the row of moving boxes, and then flitted to the magnolia tree outside. "We like to welcome new residents, ensure they understand our guidelines. We maintain certain standards here to keep property values high." I offered a polite smile, though her tone put me on edge. "I appreciate the visit, Ms. Woodson. I've heard great things about this neighborhood." She nodded, handing me the thick binder. "Please familiarize yourself with our bylaws, especially the landscaping section. We have exacting expectations regarding plant height, tree placement, and so on." Then her lips curved in a brittle grin. "You know, to keep Juniper Heights tidy." I nodded, forcing pleasantness. "I'll do that. Thank you." She gave a short, stiff laugh. "Wonderful. We take these rules very seriously. Should you have any questions, you can contact me." Her eyes lingered one moment longer on the magnolia's wide branches. Then she turned on her heel and left. Closing the door, I stood in silence. Something about her manner hinted she might be more than just a polite neighborhood official. Little did I know that this was my first encounter with a force that would soon threaten every tree in Juniper Heights, and spark a battle that would reveal my true identity as the chief of the National Forestry Service. Within a few days of unpacking, I began exploring Juniper Heights on foot. To my delight, the community boasted an abundance of lush greenery, rows of flowering crepe myrtles, arching elms shading the sidewalks, and mature pines forming a soft backdrop against the suburban skyline. It was a haven for birds, too, cardinals, finches, even the occasional hawk cruising overhead. This was exactly the sort of place I hoped to retire in someday. Neighbors proved friendly enough, at first. I met a retired teacher named Mrs. Caldwell, who took great pride in her camellia bushes, and Martin and Sandra Lopez, a young couple who spent weekends gardening under the shade of their old cypress tree. They praised Juniper Heights as quiet, safe, and scenic, though the conversation often came with uneasy laughter when they mentioned the HOA, and especially Karen. They told me small stories at first. How Ms. Woodson had scolded Martin for letting a dogwood branch overhang the sidewalk by a few inches, or how she once distributed citations to multiple neighbors because their hedges grew a bit too tall. It seemed petty, but I dealt with worse bureaucracies in my time managing national parks. I figured I could handle a strict HOA. Still, something gnawed at me. Why did everyone speak of Ms. Woodson with such apprehension? I set aside my concerns. Perhaps she was just a stickler for rules. After all, neat landscaping and clear sidewalks were no great threat. If that was the worst of it, I could live with an occasionally overbearing HOA official. Unbeknownst to me, Ms. Woodson was about to announce a new initiative that went far beyond Hedge Heights, one that would place her in direct conflict with my life's work, and spark a showdown that neither of us could have anticipated. A week after settling in, I opened my mailbox to find a glossy, official-looking HOA flyer titled Juniper Heights Clean Canopy Initiative. Beneath that heading, There was a stylized image of a single tree with red lines slashing across large sections of it, as though the limbs were being removed. The text read, "Fellow residents, in an effort to maintain the beauty and safety of Juniper Heights, the HOA is launching the Clean Canopy Initiative. Trees that are deemed overgrown, likely to cause damage, or visually disruptive may require trimming, management, or in some cases, removal. We believe a uniform approach to canopy control will enhance curb appeal, prevent property damage, and ensure a consistent aesthetic throughout our community. Please attend our next meeting to learn about mandatory inspections, fines for noncompliance, and the timeline for tree removal where necessary. Sincerely, Miranda Karen Woodson, Vice President, Juniper Heights HOA." My pulse quickened. A dedicated push to cut down or severely trim the neighborhood's mature trees. I found the language disturbing, especially the broad brush of overgrown or disruptive, which could apply to almost any large tree. That evening, I walked around the block to see if others had read the flyer. Most neighbors expressed confusion or dismay. Martin scowled, crumpling the paper in his hands. "She's always going on about leaves clogging gutters or branches over roads. But this is next level. My cypress is healthy. It's been here for decades." Mrs. Caldwell sighed. "I keep my trees trimmed, but Ms. Woodson does not appreciate how they drop seeds. She once told me that the flowers create too much mess for passers-by. Imagine, that's nature at work." I nodded in solidarity. As chief of the National Forestry Service, I'd spent my life championing the critical role of trees for ecology, property values, and quality of life. I decided to attend the upcoming HOA meeting to glean Ms. Woodson's true intentions. If it was a matter of gentle pruning for safety, I'd have no quarrel. But if she truly aimed for widespread removal, she'd find me her toughest opponent. Though, for now, I intended to keep my professional identity under wraps. I wanted to see how far she'd push before revealing who I was. On the night of the HOA meeting, the small community hall was packed with anxious residents clutching copies of the Clean Canopy Initiative flyer. A makeshift stage held a table where Ms. Woodson and a few other board members sat, papers and laptops arranged in neat piles. The chatter in the audience was subdued, punctuated by whispers of frustration. Ms. Woodson called the meeting to order with a sharp rap on the microphone. "Good evening, neighbors. Tonight, we discuss an important measure to ensure Juniper Heights remains a model of suburban tidiness." She launched into a slideshow, displaying images of large trees dropping leaves onto streets, branches grazing rooftops, and cracked sidewalks allegedly caused by aggressive root systems. The photos were cherry-picked, worst-case scenarios from who knows where, all meant to portray trees as ticking time bombs. "Our solution," Ms. Woodson declared, voice brimming with confidence, "is a systematic approach, mandatory evaluation of all trees taller than 15 feet. Any that show signs of overgrowth, potential root issues, or excessive shading," she paused for emphasis, "will be scheduled for removal or major pruning at the homeowner's expense." An immediate murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd. Excessive shading? As if providing shade was a crime. I shifted in my seat, fists clenching. This was not mere maintenance. It was a draconian measure that could see half the neighborhood's mature canopy gone in a matter of months. A resident raised his hand. "My oak is healthy, stable. Why would I pay to remove it?" Ms. Woodson gave him a frosty smile. "The board will decide which trees meet our new safety and aesthetic standards. We have professionals lined up." Mrs. Caldwell spoke up, voice trembling with anger. "We've lived here for 30 years, and our magnolias have never caused trouble. Why this sudden push?" Ms. Woodson frowned. "Ma'am, older trees are exactly the problem. They drop sap, leaves, and seeds, creating unsightly messes. We must keep Juniper Heights looking pristine for prospective homebuyers." Someone else called out. "But many of us moved here for the trees. They increase property values and reduce energy costs. I can't imagine losing them all." Ms. Woodson's eyes narrowed. "We have data suggesting otherwise. Overgrown trees lead to damage, pests, and liability issues. The board will review each case, but we anticipate significant removals will be necessary." I raised my hand, heart pounding. When she acknowledged me, I said evenly, "Is there any plan to consult certified arborists or environmental experts? Trees have ecological benefits, and we want to avoid hasty decisions." She arched an eyebrow. We have a hired landscaper, recommended by the board's president. Rest assured, we're not amateurs. If you have further questions, please read the new guidelines in detail or schedule a private consultation. Then, as if to silence dissent, she clicked to her final slide. A schedule of compliance deadlines, with fines listed for obstruction of HOA procedures. The meeting ended in a flurry of protests. Ms. Woodson stood, ignoring the outcry, and swept from the room with an air of finality. For the first time, I saw raw fear in neighbors' eyes. If half their beloved trees were deemed too tall or messy, they'd be forced to pay for removal under threat of hefty fines. As the crowd dispersed, I slipped out quietly, anger simmering beneath the surface. If Ms. Woodson thought she could unilaterally chop down these precious trees, she'd soon learn she'd picked the wrong neighborhood to bully. My next step? Gather evidence, mobilize neighbors, and, if it came to it, unleash the full authority of the National Forestry Service. But first, I needed to be strategic. I'd reveal my credentials only when absolutely necessary. In the days following the HOA meeting, I noticed tension rising throughout Juniper Heights. Ms. Woodson's inspection team began making rounds, knocking on doors, taking photos of front yards, and measuring trunk diameters. The head inspector was a surly man named Mr. Klein, who wore a utility belt of tools and carried himself like an executioner about to declare each tree's doom. Residents whispered about receiving official notices in the mail. Some, like Martin and Sandra, were told their beloved cypress had intrusive roots that might crack the sidewalk eventually. Others, like Mrs. Caldwell, were informed that her magnolias overshadowed the road, forcing drivers to pass beneath a tunnel of green. She was incensed. Isn't a leafy archway beautiful? They say it's dangerous for trucks, but no trucks come down this street. To coordinate a response, I quietly invited a group of concerned neighbors for coffee in my living room. I made sure we met in small numbers so we wouldn't draw Ms. Woodson's attention prematurely. They arrived one by one. Martin, Sandra, Mrs. Caldwell, a retired landscaper named Ross, and a few others. We exchanged stories of intimidation. Ross, the landscaper, provided a crucial perspective. Half of these problems can be resolved with strategic pruning or root barriers. Wholesale removal is overkill. I suspect Ms. Woodson's been sold on a deal with some big tree removal firm. That notion alarmed me. If there was a profit motive in clearing the canopy, it explained Ms. Woodson's zeal. Perhaps she was working with a contractor who'd promised the HOA a tidy sum or discounted services in exchange for large-scale removal. I couldn't remain passive. I have some experience with forestry regulations, I said carefully, not quite admitting my job title. We should gather documentation, photos of healthy trunks, root systems, and so on, and highlight official city or state guidelines that protect trees. Martin nodded. I've looked into local ordinances. Some protect mature trees from arbitrary removal. We can file complaints with the city if the HOA's plan violates them. We agreed to form a small tree preservation committee, planning to rally more neighbors discreetly. Our goal: slow Ms. Woodson's initiative, demand transparency, and force a legitimate review of each tree's health before the chainsaws arrived. If that failed, I was ready to escalate. The knowledge that I had direct ties to the national level gave me confidence. Ms. Woodson had no clue who she was dealing with. As the Tree Preservation Committee gathered momentum, Ms. Woodson escalated her tactics. Several neighbors reported receiving final warnings despite never having a first or second notice. The language was severe. Final warning. Your property includes one or more trees in violation of the Clean Canopy Initiative. Failure to comply with removal or major trimming within 14 days will result in daily fines of up to $250. Repeated noncompliance may trigger legal action or forced removal at homeowner expense. Juniper Heights HOA. Forced removal? That was borderline extortion. Even mild criticisms were met with swift retaliation. One neighbor, Ms. Chun, politely emailed Ms. Woodson asking for an extension while she consulted an arborist. The next day, Ms. Chin woke to find a bright orange condemnation notice stapled to her cedar tree, labeling it hazardous. Mrs. Caldwell tried calling Ms. Woodson to protest, but got only a brusque reply. If you want to avoid fines, schedule the removal. Furious, she marched to Ms. Woodson's door, only to be turned away by Mr. Klein, who hovered like a personal security guard. The rumor was that Ms. Woodson had begun hiring nighttime patrols to catch people violating landscaping rules under cover of darkness. Meanwhile, I quietly documented these actions, saving emails, scanning notices, photographing condemned trees. Each new measure reeked of overreach, a violation of basic homeowner rights, and possibly local or state environmental regulations. My anger grew, but so did my determination. At night, I pored over local statutes on tree protection and property rights. I discovered that Juniper Heights was located in a county that typically encouraged preserving mature trees, partly because they reduced flood risk and helped local wildlife. The county code required thorough inspections by certified arborists before any large-scale tree removal in residential areas. Ms. Woodson's Clean Canopy initiative seemed to brush those rules aside entirely. I realized I might have to go beyond local channels soon, perhaps alert the city or county environmental office. But first, the neighborhood needed a united front. I drafted a polite yet firm letter calling for an immediate halt to forced removals until independent arborists could assess each case. With the help of Martin, Sandra, Mrs. Caldwell, and Ross, we collected dozens of signatures from worried residents. Then we submitted it to Ms. Woodson and the rest of the HOA board. Her response? A single, terse sentence. Your request is denied. Enforcement proceeds as planned. That was the final straw. I began planning my next move, one that would leverage my position as head of the National Forestry Service if Ms. Woodson gave me no other choice. Late one afternoon, I was returning from a run when I saw Ms. Woodson in heated conversation with a man wearing a polo shirt embroidered with the logo Greenscape, Tree Removal and Landscaping. They stood beside his truck, scowling at a map of the neighborhood. The man jabbed his finger at a circled region, presumably representing areas slated for tree removal. Ms. Woodson nodded vigorously, her face set in grim determination. I slowed, trying to overhear. Snippets of conversation drifted my way. Full clearing, big payday, neighbors resist. Then Ms. Woodson spotted me and stiffened, quickly folding the map. The man hopped into his truck and peeled away, leaving Ms. Woodson to glare at me from across the road. A suspicion hardened in my mind. Ms. Woodson was in league with Greenscape, possibly hoping to profit from every tree cut. The HOA might have negotiated a contract that rewarded them if they hit a certain quota of removals. A chilling scenario, but not unprecedented. I'd witnessed shady deals before, in other communities grappling with unscrupulous contractors. I kept walking, acting as though I'd witnessed nothing. But the next day, I began investigating Greenscape's reputation. Online reviews were mixed. Some praised them for quick service. Others accused them of cutting more than agreed upon and overcharging. One news article from a nearby town described a controversy where Greenscape had removed dozens of healthy trees, claiming a blight that turned out to be exaggerated. Could Ms. Woodson be orchestrating something similar here? If so, it spelled devastation for Juniper Heights. The unique canopy made this place a refuge of greenery, boosting property values in a positive way. Stripping it bare would not only upset residents, it could also have severe environmental consequences, from soil erosion to loss of habitat. And I wasn't about to let that happen. Quietly, I gathered every piece of evidence about Ms. Woodson's relationship with Greenscape, including the suspicious photos I'd taken. Soon, I had a small dossier. If the local authorities needed cause to investigate, I was prepared to provide it. Our tree preservation committee decided to bring in a respected, certified arborist named Rebecca Lightfoot, someone with impeccable credentials who could give an unbiased evaluation of Juniper Heights trees. If she confirmed that many were healthy, we'd have strong professional backing against Ms. Woodson's reckless plan. Rebecca toured the neighborhood with Ross, Martin, and me. She examined trunk bases for rot, inspected canopies for disease, and took note of root patterns. After a thorough sweep, she sat down with us in my living room, her expression a mix of admiration and concern. You have an extraordinarily healthy urban forest here, she said. Most of these mature trees show no sign of infection or structural instability. Routine pruning can address minor issues, but I see no basis for large-scale removal. Ross frowned. We suspected as much. Ms. Woodson keeps calling them hazards. Rebecca shook her head. Hazards exist if there's advanced rot, or if the trunk is severely compromised. In some cases, a tree may become a real danger after a storm. But that's not what I'm seeing. This is one of the finest canopies I've evaluated in a suburban development. I exhaled with relief, but also felt a swirl of anger. Ms. Woodson's entire premise for the Clean Canopy Initiative, safety and property value, was a smokescreen. Armed with Rebecca's official report, we could challenge the HOA. Yet, that same afternoon, Ms. Woodson sent out a mass email, triumphantly announcing the official start date for tree removals. She boasted that a professional landscaping team would begin clearing designated properties the following week. The wording indicated absolutely no compromise. Her disregard for our letter, for the local laws, and for genuine arborist input was appalling. Rebecca, outraged, offered to speak before the HOA or sign a formal affidavit. We accepted. This might be the push we needed to force Ms. Woodson into retreat, unless she doubled down once again. And if she did, I had a final trump card, my direct line to state and national forestry authorities who could intervene in an ecological crisis. Our worst fears materialized one early morning. Residents jolted awake to the sound of heavy machinery rumbling down the streets. Greenscape trucks, loaded with chainsaws, chippers, and bulldozers, began parking near designated houses. The workers, clad in neon vests, carried official-looking checklists bearing the HOA's letterhead. Mrs. Caldwell called me in a panic. "They're here. They say they're cutting my magnolias first." I told them no, but they say the HOA has the final word. Within minutes, I raced to her property. Indeed, a crew stood by the curb, ropes and harnesses at the ready. One of them revved a chainsaw. Mrs. Caldwell, tears in her eyes, was physically blocking them from accessing her yard. "You can't do this," she cried. I approached the foreman, brandishing the arborist's assessment in hand. "These trees are healthy and protected by local statutes," I said. "You have no legal right to remove them without the homeowner's consent or a court order." The man shrugged apologetically. "Our contract is with Ms. Woodson and the HOA. They claim they have the authority." At that moment, Ms. Woodson herself arrived on scene, stepping out of her SUV with the arrogance of a medieval baron. She wore a crisp outfit and clutched a clipboard. "These removals have been authorized by the HOA. As you well know," she snapped. "Stand aside so the crew can do their job." Mrs. Caldwell refused to budge. More neighbors gathered, forming an impromptu blockade around the magnolias. Ross soon arrived, waving a copy of the arborist's report, and Martin began filming the confrontation on his phone. I locked eyes with Ms. Woodson. "You can't strong-arm these people out of their own yards. They have rights, both as homeowners and under local environmental regulations." Her lip curled. "Is that so? Then we can see you in court. But for now, we proceed." A heavy sense of finality settled. Ms. Woodson signaled to the crew. They advanced, chainsaws roaring to life. The onlookers gasped. Mrs. Caldwell clasped her arms around the trunk of the nearest magnolia, tears streaming down her cheeks. I realized the time had come. This was no longer an internal HOA squabble. It was a reckless environmental offense. My position at the National Forestry Service granted me direct authority to intervene if local or state conservation laws were being violated. I whipped out my phone, prepared to call the county's Environmental Enforcement Office, and, if necessary, mobilize broader resources. But Ms. Woodson had unleashed a force so brazen that only a swift and public shutdown would suffice. Enough was enough. Before making the call, I turned to Ms. Woodson, voice resonating with a calm I didn't entirely feel. "I've tried reasoning. I've shown you professional arborist reports. But you refuse to listen. Since you appear set on committing an environmental violation, you leave me no choice but to escalate." She scoffed. "Escalate? Go ahead. The HOA's attorneys will bury you in injunctions." I gave her a measured look. "Ms. Woodson, I am not just a random homeowner. I am chief of the National Forestry Service. My job is to protect critical environments across this country, and I have direct contacts with state and federal agencies that oversee tree preservation laws. If you persist in unauthorized mass removal of healthy trees, you could face significant legal consequences, including fines you can't imagine." Her face froze, eyes widening with disbelief. "You're lying." I calmly reached into my jacket and withdrew my official badge and ID. A hush fell over the crowd as the golden emblem glinted in the morning sunlight. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the throng of neighbors. Even the chainsaw operators paused, uncertain. Yes, Ms. Woodson, I continued. I've spent years ensuring the protection of forests large and small. That extends to communities that rely on these trees for shade, aesthetics, and ecological balance. Your so-called clean canopy plan is not only morally reprehensible, it's likely illegal without a thorough environmental impact assessment. If you proceed, I will ensure the authorities step in today. For a moment, Ms. Woodson looked as though she might faint. Then her face twisted with anger. This is an HOA matter. You have no right to meddle. I exhaled slowly. Local statutes require certain permits for major tree removal. Your operation has none, and we have the arborist's report confirming these trees are healthy. If you defy us, the county enforcement will be here within the hour, and I guarantee the media won't be far behind. She stammered, looking around at the stunned crowd. The assembled neighbors glowered at her, newly emboldened by my revelation. The greenscape foreman scratched his head, uncertain whether to proceed. Clearly, they didn't want to be caught on the wrong side of a national-level scandal. Then Ms. Woodson turned on her heel, marched back to her SUV, and sped off without another word. The foreman, after a tense pause, sighed and motioned to his crew to stand down. Mrs. Caldwell collapsed to her knees, relief washing over her. A cheer erupted from the crowd. In that instant, the tide had turned. Ms. Woodson had tried to brandish her power, only to discover she was outmatched by laws and by a neighbor she'd underestimated. But the fight wasn't over yet. Word of the confrontation spread like wildfire. By midday, local news vans rolled into Juniper Heights, capturing footage of anxious homeowners standing guard over their trees. Reporters interviewed me, the neighbors, and even the greenscape crew. The reveal of my title, head of the National Forestry Service, added extra dramatic flair. Headlines teased, HOA official attempts mass tree removal, foiled by undercover forestry chief. In those interviews, I calmly explained the importance of preserving healthy urban forests, referencing city regulations and moral responsibility. Meanwhile, Martin's smartphone videos went viral on social media, showing Ms. Woodson's meltdown and abrupt retreat. Public opinion clearly sided with the neighbors defending their trees against an overreaching HOA. Shortly after, the county's environmental office announced they'd opened an investigation into the HOA's procedures, specifically Ms. Woodson's claims of a blanket permit that apparently did not exist. Greenscape, facing public backlash, publicly stated they would pause all removals until proper compliance was confirmed. Their spokesman insisted they had no desire to cut healthy trees illegally. For Juniper Heights, it felt like an earthquake had rattled the foundation of Ms. Woodson's power. Residents who once cowered at her demands began to speak out. They shared old emails, unexplained fines, and rumors of shady deals. Some petitioned for an emergency HOA board meeting to remove Ms. Woodson from her post entirely. The board president, Mr. Albright, was conspicuously silent, presumably reeling from the fiasco. Though I never relished humiliating anyone publicly, it was clear that Ms. Woodson's actions could have wreaked irreversible harm on the neighborhood's canopy. If exposing my identity meant stopping her, so be it. Now, with the authorities on notice and the media covering every angle, Ms. Woodson's reign of intimidation was effectively over. Even with the rising storm of condemnation, Ms. Woodson refused to go quietly. Instead, she launched a last-ditch effort to salvage her position. She posted a bombastic statement on the HOA website accusing me of falsely claiming to be a federal official and meddling with the community's right to manage personal property. She alleged that the National Forestry Service has no jurisdiction here and threatened to sue me personally for defamation and disruption of contractual obligations. The post was full of legal-sounding jargon, obviously calculated to confuse or frighten residents. She promised a new town hall meeting to reveal the truth. Predictably, some folks panicked, worried about lawsuits. The Tree Preservation Committee, however, remained calm. Martin quietly reminded them. We all saw her reaction when the real badge came out. She's bluffing. I consulted the local environment commissioner's office, who reassured me that Ms. Woodson's claims were baseless. Zoning laws and city ordinances explicitly protected large-scale tree removal under their purview, not under arbitrary HOA mandates. Meanwhile, my own legal counsel from the National Forestry Service confirmed that Ms. Woodson had zero grounds to sue me. As Ms. Woodson's town hall approached, I prepared thoroughly, gathering official documents and statements from the county's environmental department. The neighbors, too, were ready to stand up and share their experiences. If Ms. Woodson hoped for a rousing comeback, she might be in for an unwelcome surprise. The day of Ms. Woodson's big revelation arrived. The community hall was once again packed, this time with local reporters, a few city officials, and the usual crowd of anxious residents. A small group of Ms. Woodson's loyalists sat near the front, arms folded. Everyone else wore expressions ranging from skepticism to outright anger. Ms. Woodson took the stage, pale but resolute. She clicked through a gaudy PowerPoint titled Defending Juniper Heights, exposing the lies. Slide after slide regurgitated her arguments. That trees were a menace, the HOA had absolute authority, and I was a self-styled federal agent. She concluded with a dramatic flourish, yelling, "He is no hero. He seeks national attention at our expense." Murmurs of disapproval swept the audience. Then Mr. Albright, the HOA president, timidly approached the microphone, glancing at Ms. Woodson with pained eyes. We want to hear the other side. The board is open to public comment." His voice trembled. That was my cue. Rising from my seat, I walked to the stage, joined by Martin and the county's environmental officer, Ms. Delgado, who had graciously agreed to speak. I took the microphone, calmly addressing Ms. Woodson. "Ms. Woodson, you claimed I am an imposter. Here are my official credentials." I held up my badge again, then passed my business card to Ms. Delgado, who confirmed my identity on behalf of the city. The crowd stirred with whispers. Any lingering doubts about my authenticity vanished. I continued. "More importantly, we have local regulations guaranteeing that healthy, mature trees cannot be removed without thorough inspection and permits. Ms. Delgado will explain." Ms. Delgado stepped forward, explaining that her office had never been contacted by the HOA for the mass removal. She cited code sections guaranteeing residents the right to appeal. "So, Ms. Woodson's initiative lacks legal basis," Ms. Delgado concluded. "No official permission was sought, let alone granted." Gasps echoed. Then Martin played a short video clip showing Ms. Woodson directing Greenscape to cut healthy trees, ignoring pleas from homeowners. The audience grew restless, outraged by the brazenness. Murmured statements like, "I knew it," and "she lied to us," spread across the hall. Ms. Woodson, cornered, tried to regain composure. "We, the board, we have discretion to ensure safety." She flipped through papers, searching for some legal lifeline. I turned to the crowd. "We all want a safe neighborhood, but safety must be balanced with environmental stewardship. We have proof from a certified arborist that these trees pose no imminent danger. Ms. Woodson has no right to coerce homeowners into removal. If anything, her scheme might have been financially motivated." At that point, Ms. Caldwell bravely spoke from the audience. "Karen told me I'd have to pay thousands to remove my magnolias or face daily fines. She said it was non-negotiable. Now we see it was all a lie." Ross chimed in. "She threatened me, too, when I questioned the cost. And I have the email receipts." Looking around, Ms. Woodson seemed to realize the entire room had turned against her. The city officials glared disapprovingly. Cameras flashed from the press row, and her own loyalists looked visibly uncomfortable. Defeat pressed onto her face like a heavy weight. Mr. Albright hesitated, then stood. I'm calling an immediate executive session of the HOA board to discuss Ms. Woodson's position." He gestured to Ms. Woodson to follow him backstage, but she stood rooted in shock. The crowd erupted into cheers, applause, and exclamations of relief. Some pounded the seats in excitement. With that, Ms. Woodson's final stand had collapsed under the weight of overwhelming evidence. In the days following the dramatic town hall, Ms. Woodson resigned from her position as vice president of the HOA, citing personal reasons. Internal documents eventually leaked, indicating a questionable financial agreement between the HOA leadership, spearheaded by Ms. Woodson, and Greenscape, which had offered steep discounts in exchange for a guaranteed volume of work. The fiasco had cost Ms. Woodson her reputation and possibly opened her to legal scrutiny if the county decided to pursue charges. The new, interim HOA board quickly issued a statement suspending the Clean Canopy initiative. They also formed a new subcommittee, one that included me, Ms. Delgado, and other community members, to oversee legitimate tree maintenance, ensuring no healthy tree would be cut without thorough oversight. The neighbors exhaled a collective sigh of relief, many leaving their porch lights on at night to celebrate the victory for the canopy. Word traveled beyond Juniper Heights. A local news station aired an in-depth segment about how a high-ranking forestry official had defended suburban trees from a rogue HOA. Viewers across the state praised the neighborhood for standing up, and my inbox flooded with messages of gratitude and curiosity. Some teased me about living an undercover life as a mild-mannered homeowner by day, forestry chief by night. Meanwhile, Ms. Woodson vanished from public view. Some reported she put her house on the market. Others said she retreated, unwilling to face the community's scorn. Whatever her fate, the community felt a mixture of relief and sadness. She'd been a tyrant, but also a neighbor. People wondered what drove her to such extremes. Greed? Ego? Perhaps it no longer mattered. For me, the episode reinforced a truth I'd always championed, that trees are more than just landscaping. They're living pillars connecting nature with our daily lives. Protecting them isn't just a federal or state matter. It's our responsibility as neighbors, too. A month later, I walked the streets of Juniper Heights under the same leafy canopy that had first drawn me here. The air felt lighter. Children laughed in yards shaded by the very oaks Ms. Woodson had condemned. Birds sang among branches that no longer feared the roar of chainsaws. A breeze carried the sweet scent of pine needles, a reminder of the near disaster narrowly averted. At an HOA meeting, one far calmer and friendlier than before, Mr. Albright introduced the new subcommittee members. Ross, Martin, Mrs. Caldwell, and I would guide future landscaping policies. Arborist Rebecca Lightfoot had even offered to hold free educational sessions on proper pruning techniques. The community was forging a fresh path, one of informed stewardship rather than top-down mandates. After the meeting, neighbors chatted around refreshment tables. Martin teased me. "So, do we address you as chief now?" I grinned. "Only if you want me to fine you for stepping on a leaf." Mrs. Caldwell laughed. "We can't thank you enough. You saved my magnolias and my sanity." Ross, sipping punch, nodded. "It's remarkable. I've never seen an HOA fiasco turn around so fast." I shrugged, warmth filling my chest. It was all of us together. I just had the advantage of certain credentials. My gaze swept across the room. People from different backgrounds, all uniting for a cause. In that moment, Juniper Heights felt like the inclusive, neighborly place I'd always hoped to find. As dusk settled that evening, I sat on my porch, gazing at the magnolia in my front yard. Silhouettes of finches perched among its branches, chirping softly. The faint glow of street lamps illuminated a row of towering pines lining the avenue, their needles rustling in the gentle wind. It struck me just how close we'd come to losing it all, to living in a stripped, lifeless community. My phone pinged, a message from a colleague in the National Forestry Service, linking an article about the HOA showdown in Juniper Heights. The piece praised our victory as a testament to the power of grassroots organizing and a well-timed intervention from a federal forestry official. I typed a short reply. "Thanks for the support. Looks like the trees are staying right where they belong. Chat soon." Then, as the phone screen dimmed, I allowed myself a moment of gratitude. Perhaps in the grand scheme, the struggle to save a few dozen suburban trees might seem small compared to preserving national parks or battling wildfires. But for this community, it was everything. And the principle was the same. Trees sustain life, anchor ecosystems, and feed our spirits. Defending them, no matter how local or large, was always worth it. In the following weeks, Juniper Heights embraced a more harmonious spirit. The newly elected HOA members actively sought resident input on all landscaping decisions. Soon, they introduced volunteer tree guardians, residents who would take turns monitoring the health of certain older specimens and consult with arborists about needed care. The HOA budget, once earmarked for massive removal, was now redirected to planting additional saplings in public spaces. A modest park blossomed at the community's edge, featuring benches under flowering cherries and a small playground beneath sturdy oaks. Families began gathering there on weekends, enjoying the shade and chatting about anything but petty HOA politics. It felt as though the entire neighborhood had collectively awakened, appreciating the canopy with a renewed sense of wonder. Even the streets looked brighter. Instead of dreaded visits from landscapers brandishing chainsaws, we saw small teams pruning branches gently, guided by Ross and sometimes by Ms. Lightfoot. Children wandered, collecting fallen leaves for school projects, learning the names of different trees. What once had been a source of intimidation was now a point of pride. I learned that Ms. Woodson's home eventually sold to a friendly young couple who cherished the property's old sycamore. They told me they felt lucky to inherit such a lovely yard, especially after hearing rumors of how close those trees had been to the chopping block. The irony wasn't lost on me. And so the story of Ms. Woodson, or Karen, slowly faded from everyday conversation. Residents mentioned her name less and less, focusing instead on new beginnings. If there was a moral to the entire saga, it was that no single person could override the collective will to protect nature, especially when that person's motives were questionable. And that, united, a community could stand firm against intimidation. Several months later, I was in the local grocery store when I unexpectedly crossed paths with Ms. Woodson. She stood in the produce aisle, picking through apples. I almost didn't recognize her. She looked subdued, the usual haughty aura replaced by a worn expression. She spotted me and froze, clearly torn between anger and shame. Despite everything, I approached calmly. "Ms. Woodson," I said in a measured tone, "I didn't expect to see you around here. I assumed you'd moved on." She lowered her eyes. "I'm only in town briefly, collecting some things left behind at my old house." An awkward silence lingered. Then she added, "I heard the board forced me out officially, like you wanted." I bristled. It's not about what I wanted. The community demanded accountability. Their trees, their homes, these matter. She exhaled, voice cracking. "You wouldn't understand. I had reasons. Offers from developers, plans for expansions. This place needs modernization, and the trees hinder that." But no one saw the bigger picture. I studied her face. Bitterness mingled with regret. Maybe there's room for compromise and modernization, but not at the cost of eradicating healthy trees. It's about balance. The community was willing to work with you, if you had listened. She blinked, perhaps replaying the fiasco in her head. Then she mustered a faint shrug. "Doesn't matter now. Good luck with your forest." Her tone dripped with sarcasm, but lacked its previous venom. I gave a small nod. "I do wish you well, Ms. Woodson. Truly. I hope wherever you go next, you'll consider working with the environment, not against it." She said nothing more, turning away toward the checkout. As I watched her go, I felt neither triumph nor pity, just a calm sense of finality. Some people never learn, but at least she could do no more harm here. News of Juniper Heights' transformation caught national interest. A major broadcaster ran a segment on communities saving their canopy, featuring interviews with Ross, Mrs. Caldwell, and me. They even showcased before and after drone footage of the neighborhood. Where once there had been fear of decimation, there was now a thriving canopy, newly planted saplings, and an engaged citizenry. The segment praised how local activism, combined with expert guidance, overcame the tyranny of one overzealous official. It also highlighted the broader importance of urban forestry, how trees reduce energy consumption, improve mental health, and provide habitats for wildlife. Messages of support poured in from viewers nationwide, with some asking how they could replicate Juniper Heights' success in their own HOA-run neighborhoods. Back in my office at the National Forestry Service, I fielded phone calls and emails from colleagues. Some teased that I'd become a poster child for suburban tree protection. Others genuinely wanted to replicate the model, forming committees and forging alliances between residents, arborists, and local authorities. The potential ripple effect excited me. Meanwhile, Juniper Heights residents walked a bit taller, proud of having triumphed in a story that resonated beyond our small enclave. The joy of strolling under leafy boughs was sweeter for knowing how close we'd come to losing them. To mark the neighborhood's renewed spirit, the HOA board, now led by a mild-mannered neighbor, Ms. Tran, organized a canopy celebration day. Families gathered at the new park, setting up picnic tables. Children drew chalk art on the sidewalks, depicting leafy trees and bright sunshine. Local musicians provided a mellow soundtrack. The aroma of grilled food mingled with the scent of warm pine needles. Ross led a guided nature walk, identifying different species and explaining their roles in the ecosystem. Rebecca Lightfoot was a guest of honor, answering questions about tree care. Even Ms. Delgado from the County Environment Office dropped by, praising the community's positive shift. Eventually, the crowd gathered for brief remarks. Martin took the mic, acknowledging all who fought to protect the canopy. We stood up together, and we won together. Thunderous applause followed. Then Mrs. Caldwell tearfully thanked everyone for saving her magnolias, joking that she'd be baking pies for the entire neighborhood. More cheers and laughter. Finally, Miss Tran called me up. I wasn't expecting to speak, but the neighbors insisted. Standing beneath the dappled shade of an oak, I gazed out at the community that had become my home. I never planned on revealing my job title, I began, smiling wryly. But circumstances demanded it. In truth, though, any of you could have led this cause. Real change happens when neighbors unite to protect what they love. I'm honored to be part of Juniper Heights, a place that shows how a shared passion can overcome even the toughest obstacles. A wave of applause and grateful hollers followed. My heart swelled. This was the kind of grassroots success story I'd champion for the rest of my career. In the months that followed, Juniper Heights' story continued to inspire. I received letters from strangers living in similarly controlled HOAs who felt emboldened to question unfair mandates. A middle school environmental club wrote me, describing how they used the Juniper Heights example in a class project about the power of community activism. One letter, from a retiree in another state, particularly touched me. Dear Forestry Chief, I've lived in an HOA where they forced me to cut a beautiful maple my late husband planted decades ago. When I saw the news about your neighborhood, I broke down in tears. If only I'd known I had the right to fight back. Thank you for showing that sometimes the little people can stand up. Sincerely, Dolores in Maine. Reading such letters reminded me that while Ms. Woodson's story ended with her downfall, the larger narrative was about hope. About how we can preserve nature's gifts even in the smallest pockets of suburbia if we stand together. It reaffirmed my belief that no place is too small or too local for environmental advocacy. Each sapling, each old oak, each magnolia can be a battlefield for preserving life and beauty. I shared these letters with my neighbors, who were moved to see how far their fight had reached. Some even wrote back, forging pen pal relationships with people in distant states, exchanging advice and moral support. In this way, the canopy we defended in Juniper Heights offered shade to more than just our immediate streets. It lit a beacon for others searching for encouragement in their own neighborhoods. With Ms. Woodson gone, the HOA's culture transformed dramatically. Dues were repurposed into beautification projects that didn't involve cutting down trees, like planting native flowers, installing bird baths, and updating the community playground. The board voted to adopt a new motto: stewardship, not domination. Martin, now an unofficial community historian, compiled a digital scrapbook documenting the entire ordeal, from the first flyer announcing the Clean Canopy Initiative to the triumphant day Ms. Woodson retreated. He included heartfelt quotes, photos of neighbors linking arms, and screenshots of positive news coverage. The scrapbook circulated among new residents so they'd understand the neighborhood's values from the outset. Meanwhile, the memory of Ms. Woodson's aggression served as a reminder of what can happen when power goes unchecked. The board drafted revised bylaws that explicitly required independent arborist consultation before any major tree removal. They also inserted a clause mandating a majority homeowner vote for large landscaping changes. This transparency served as a bulwark against future Karen-like ambitions. I watched these developments with quiet satisfaction. The best measure of success wasn't just that we'd saved the existing canopy. It was that we'd created a framework ensuring it remained safe for generations. And in a world where suburban sprawl often leads to deforestation, that was no small achievement. Although I continued my leadership at the National Forestry Service, traveling frequently, Juniper Heights became my true sanctuary. My daily walks along the tree-lined sidewalks never grew old. Every morning, the rising sun filtered through the leaves, painting the pavement in a shifting mosaic of light and shadow. Neighbors frequently stopped me to chat about the best ways to care for their trees, how much watering was needed, how to identify signs of disease. Sometimes the questions had nothing to do with official duties. They simply recognized me as a friend who understood the deeper bond between people and nature. In rare quiet moments, I reflected on the uncanny overlap between my professional mission and personal life. Perhaps it was fate that drew me to Juniper Heights, some cosmic nudge ensuring that these trees would not be lost to petty tyranny. Or maybe it was a testament to how our passions shape our destinies. I devoted my life to preserving forests at a grand scale, yet found one of my most important battles in a single suburban community. Either way, I felt gratitude for the unexpected synergy. My presence here allowed me to combine my official authority with grassroots activism, forging a unique victory. And in the process, I'd found a place to call home, one that embraced nature, overcame adversity, and now thrived in green abundance. Time slipped by, and new families moved into Juniper Heights. Some arrived from more urban settings, marveling at the tranquil canopy overhead. They'd ask about the tall pines or ancient oaks, and longtime residents proudly recounted the story of how the neighborhood once faced a threat to its trees, only to unite and preserve them. Occasionally, visiting relatives or out-of-town friends would ask, "Did that Karen lady really want to cut them all down?" We'd nod, recalling in detail how close we'd come to losing the very essence of our neighborhood. But those memories felt less bitter now, overshadowed by the joyful reality of what had been saved. At gatherings, Martin introduced me as the forest superhero, earning groans and laughter. I insisted I was no hero, just someone who happened to have the right set of skills at the right time. The real heroes were the neighbors who risked fines, confronted intimidation, and stood up to Ms. Woodson's nonsense. They showed that an HOA's biggest strength is its community, not a single overbearing official. We also shared best practices with other neighborhoods grappling with overreaching HOAs. People from neighboring counties visited to see how we'd structured the new committees. The seeds of an urban forestry collaboration took root, an informal network of suburbs exchanging tips on caring for trees and dealing with difficult associations. That synergy expanded far beyond Juniper Heights, showing that even small neighborhoods could pioneer big change. Several years later, I find myself standing at the edge of Juniper Heights Park, now lush with new growth. The magnolias at Mrs. Caldwell's home thrive, their blossoms perfuming the warm spring air. Martin and Sandra's cypress stand strong, offering a shady nook for their kids to play. The canopy overhead is thicker than ever, supported by replanting efforts that replaced any truly diseased or storm-damaged trees with fresh saplings. With the afternoon sun streaming through the leaves, I close my eyes and listen to the soothing rustle of branches, the chatter of squirrels, the distant hum of neighborly conversation. Peace, that elusive gem in suburban life, abounds here. And so does the knowledge that the trees, and the people who love them, have prevailed. Glancing down the lane, I catch glimpses of families tending gardens, children riding bikes beneath arching limbs, and colorful birds flitting among the branches. Each scene reaffirms what we fought for. Each day of life under this canopy is a victory in its own right. Yes, Ms. Woodson once tried to cut every tree, ignorant of the larger powers and deeper love that bound this community to its living pillars. In her arrogance, she triggered a crisis that awakened our collective spirit. In the end, that crisis also paved the way for a more open, cooperative, and green future, one where local voices and expert knowledge work side by side. As for me, I remain a proud resident, champion, and caretaker. My official role in the National Forestry Service continues, but my greatest satisfaction is stepping onto my porch each morning, looking out at the steadfast magnolia, and knowing that in a small corner of the world, nature and community stand strong together. And so, life in Juniper Heights continues happily, with the gentle rustle of leaves overhead, an enduring testament to what can happen when good people unite to protect the trees they love.